This is crazy. According to reports, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell is now considering stepping down from the U.S. Central Bank. Here is the official document that was released by the chairman of the U.S. Federal Housing Finance Agency. And the analysts are already writing here, expect the most divine God candle if Jerome Powell steps down. We will truly ascend to Valhalla. This document could change everything here and is currently causing a huge stir. Let's take a closer look at this. Additionally, we have CNBC now reporting live on TV that there are almost no downside risks left for Bitcoin. Of course, there are always some downside risks, but CNBC now sees almost none left. It's only going up from here. A massive trend line has just been broken, which now points to rising Bitcoin prices. We're going to take a detailed look at all of this, but first, smash that like button below for higher Bitcoin prices. And yes, every like counts. The more likes, the higher the Bitcoin prices. Some people never want to believe that, but there really is a very, very strong correlation. Just kidding. But of course, it still helps push the algorithm and get these videos out there. I really think I need to say this again. Right now, we're still at a very, very high interest rate level, and if Jerome Powell actually gets ousted, then the money printing supercycle will kick off, which also means that the Bitcoin Valhalla pump could be very, very close. And that's why Simply Bitcoin writes here, you don't often get the chance to be ahead of the world and front-run everyone. Of course, there are already 1 or 2% of the world's population who somehow own Bitcoin, and we're at about 2, 3, maybe 4% adoption. So you can't front-run everyone anymore, but you can still front-run the majority of the world. You can still front-run Bratwurst Hosh, Schnitzelpeter, and so on. Those guys are all still fair game. And now let's take a look at this. This is actually an official document here. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell is reportedly considering stepping down. Better buckle up here. If we take a look, this is from the U.S. Federal Housing Finance Agency. So from the U.S. Federal Housing Finance Agency. That's actually how it's pronounced. Here it says, statement from the chairman of the board of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, William J. Pulte, who has already caused a stir here in the past. Now he's saying that Jerome Powell will step down. And here, there's also a quote from Washington, D.C. I'm encouraged by reports that Jerome Powell is considering resigning. I think this will be the right direction for America and the economy will boom. That's the original quote here. So he's saying here that he apparently has some information now. It looks like Jerome Powell is stepping down. This is an official document from an official agency in the USA, and America will boom afterwards because interest rates will go down. And not only will America boom, but Bitcoin will also boom. And now we really need to pay close attention. That means this all sounds super bullish right now. Interest rates are going down. Donald Trump is also saying lower interest rates by 3%. I mean, just think about that. If Jerome Powell is out of the picture, things are really going to take off. Then it's just going to be full throttle and Bitcoin will pump even higher. That means we're at current all-time highs, even though there isn't really massive support from the Fed at the moment. But now you have to be careful because something really wild just happened here. As a source, Bill Pulte, the director of the US FHFA, just published an article, This Is What We Know Now, where he basically makes this claim. And now, pay attention. The source of the article is actually Bill Pulte himself. In other words, Bill Pulte is now citing sources for an article that is based on his own sources. That means he probably even issued the document himself, put in some quotes of his own, slapped an official stamp on it, and then posts something like, Fed Chair Jerome Powell reportedly considering resigning. And the whole thing, of course, is based on his own document, which he then links to again. And Pulte, you should know, is quite a crafty guy. He really does have a lot of followers here. Let me quickly check again how many he has here. He has 3 million followers here. You really have to take that in. 3 million followers. And he also advocated for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to basically use Bitcoin as mortgage collateral. And now he's saying that this is happening, and everyone is retweeting it. Everyone is pushing what he tweeted. And the whole thing has even made it into the news already. Let's listen in briefly to what the news is saying about it.
Chairman of the board of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, he piled on to the Trump versus Powell feud. Listen to this.
Issued a statement today saying, quote, I'm encouraged by reports that Jerome Powell is considering resigning. I think this will be the right decision for America and the economy will boom, unquote. I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to. Maybe it's wishful thinking on the, he had Powell's thought about it.
But you can already see it's really gaining traction. But you also have to be careful. There's no official confirmation from the Fed here. It's just going viral now, but actually it's just a rigged game on his part. So in my opinion, this is clearly a shady move. But of course he's trying to put pressure here and basically post so-called accomplished facts that aren't actually accomplished at all. And he also wants to push the housing market here because he simply says that interest rates are so high now, the housing market isn't being pushed hard enough. And he basically wants to push his own agenda here. Because if we have lower interest rates, then the housing markets get a boost, construction loans become cheaper, it becomes easier to build, more people will finance houses again, and things like that. That means, of course, he also has his own agenda here, But at the same time, this would pump up the Bitcoin price. And it also looks like a big Bitcoin because he was also responsible for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac now considering Bitcoin as collateral for loans. And that would, of course, be another really, really big step if Bitcoin were to be used as collateral for real estate loans and things like that. What was also interesting here he also posts a very, very interesting chart here. He says, yeah, we've just broken through a massive trend line and no one in the real world knows about it or cares. And this was published by Chain Street. No, wait, that's wrong. Right? He published it here, and it's actually from someone called Stack Wisely, and he says, multi-cycle giga resistance shattered. Let's have some fun. But you also have to say, you often see graphics like this being shared where someone posts some chart and says, now this or that line has been broken, and now this or that will happen, and now we're going to skyrocket to millions, and so on. Of course, you always have to be a bit careful with that kind of thing. I don't really put much stock in all this chart analysis anyway. It's always nice and interesting to look at, but you always have to be a bit careful with it. So, let's just sum up what's happened in the last 2 weeks. And it's just so intense. Most people have already forgotten everything that's going on behind the scenes here, because things are happening so fast and so many things are happening all at once. So, the conflict between President Trump and Elon Musk has escalated. Then we have this Congress passes Trump's big beautiful bill, basically the big bill of shame, the big money printing law, which could of course send Bitcoin to the moon. So, more money gets printed, which could lead to higher Bitcoin prices. Elon Musk announces the founding of the America Party, which, among other things, might be open to Bitcoin. Elon Musk even liked a tweet here where he said he might secretly buy Bitcoin, and he also spoke out himself, saying fiat money is kind of terrible and Bitcoin is interesting and all that. Then, fourth, President Trump is calling for a record-breaking interest rate cut of 300 basis points, so 3%. I already mentioned that briefly earlier. Then here we have the USFHFAA. The director claims Fed Chairman Powell is considering resignation. We just covered that. The U.S. stock market is reaching a new all-time high. Has there ever been a more entertaining market? I mean, what's happening here is really, really wild. But we also have to add one thing now, which I haven't even mentioned yet, because if we assume the scenario where, okay, Jerome Powell gets ousted, interest rates are cut by 3 percentage points, and then the market just pumps endlessly. But you also have to say that's kind of the dream scenario, because if something like that happens and interest rates are just cut by 3 points, 3%, then of course that's also a massive shock for the market. I mean, just think about that for a second. What does the market think then? The market is like, what's going on now? Are we going into a world war? Or why are interest rates cut by 3 percentage points? That has never happened before. I mean, not during the COVID phase, not during the 2008 financial crisis, not even during the dot-com bubble. We've never had a 3% rate cut. Nothing even close to that has ever happened. At some point, I looked it up. It was like 1.5% or something. Or I think it was close to 2% at most that they ever cut, but 3%, that's never happened. And to do that all at once, together with a resignation or the stepping down of a Fed chair and so on. I mean, yes, in the long and medium term, that's obviously bullish, but in the short term, it could also trigger massive uncertainty in the market. So I would be really, really curious to see how the market would react to that. Feel free to write in the comments below what you think, how the market would react in this situation. I could even imagine that Bitcoin would react positively, but the stock markets would totally freak out or something, and price it in completely as a panic signal or something like that. No idea, it's hard to gauge. In any case, we now have an assessment from CNBC here, and I found it really, really crazy to hear something like this. Just imagine if someone had told you 2 years ago that something like this would be reported on CNBC.
In my conversation, ETFs saying their biggest day of inflows this year yesterday at more than $1 billion. Now, investors, of course, expected new records in the second half, given a strong institutional demand and regulatory tailwinds. It's hard in my conversations for a lot of investors to identify downside risk. And historically, July is a strong month for Bitcoin and probably take a macro event to.
So she actually said that it's now very, very difficult for her and her colleagues to identify downside risks for Bitcoin. So what downside risks are even left here? Could Bitcoin, be stopped by an alien invasion? Or will Donald Trump pull some weird stunt that could suppress Bitcoin or something like that? She goes on a bit more here, but I just find it crazy that on TV, look, in Germany, Bitcoin is totally talked down. And here in the US on TV or on CNBC, they're saying, hey, there really aren't any big ways left for Bitcoin to be destroyed or for it to go down from here. To be fair, you have to add that Bitcoin can drop 20% over a weekend at any time. That's always possible. We've seen that happen in the past, too. Of course, the probability keeps getting lower, and I don't really see a lot of downside risks right now. But you do have to honestly say, just because things look really, really good right now, Bitcoin can always surprise us, especially when people are getting too optimistic. Then we've often seen pullbacks again, but listen to what else she has to say.
Strong month for Bitcoin. It'd probably take a macro event to hit or suppress prices. Macro catalysts, of course, are typically fewer in the summer, and investors tend to pare back their risk. I'd watch the Fed meeting at the end of the month, knowing how split Fed officials are and how aggressively to cut. And
She's saying it would really take a major macro event to shock Bitcoin here. We can also see that things like tariffs and so on no longer really affect the Bitcoin price. That means it would really take something like new outbreaks of conflicts somewhere in the world, or some kind of embargoes, or who knows, some black swan events that you just can't imagine, maybe natural disasters or something like that. I don't know, it's hard to come up with, but it would definitely take something big to shake Bitcoin here. She also says that in the summer, these kinds of major events and shock stories are usually less common, so right now they're moving very, very bullishly here. And if you're feeling bullish here, I'll put a link to 21 Bitcoin for you down below. Here you can buy Bitcoin simply, safely, and easily. With code BITCOINODL, you can still get up to 20% off fees when buying Bitcoin. Absolutely recommended. See you. Until then,